ושמחת בחגך והיית שמח ושמחת בחגך והיית שמח די 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 די
Chag Sameach, everybody. Good Yontiv. The season continues, and we're so happy to be together tonight for what is going to be yet another reimagining, revisioning of the way we celebrate in this new time in which we live. This is going to take some creativity on our part and on all of your part. There's a lot of sadness. We all know that we can't do these holidays in the ways we have loved and known in years past. It's hard not to think about, and we remember dancing in the courtyard in Bethune Street. We used to go down the ramp with the Sifrei Torah and dance in the courtyard till the people in the buildings above us used to get so mad and yell at us. And then there was the dancing outside on 30th Street and the various different hakafot that we did. We can't do that this year. So we've really tried to reimagine how to celebrate the Torah. So I'm very excited about what we've come up with. Honestly, there's a way that this season has forced us to think differently about each of these yontivs, each of this Shabbos, each time we have a bar mitzvah, each time we do a wedding. We're required to go back to the foundation, to the very base of each of these observances, funeral, shiva minyanim, everything, and ask, what is the essential spiritual moment? What are we trying to achieve spiritually in all of these moments? And we have to kind of go back to the very foundation and rebuild it up again without using the tools that we're accustomed to and that we're used to using to express different things. And we did that starting back in June, thinking about how to really reimagine Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Yontiv morning services and Shabbos services, and you all know the story. So here we are at Simchat Torah, and it is the holiday after which our synagogue is named, so we have a special connection to it. Last night I told the whole Ganze Megillah story about CBST's name, and if you missed it, it's in Rabbi Cohen's book that tells the story of the CBST. It was not supposed to be our name, but it became our name, and it's a great story. But a few things about tonight of orientation and perspective for those who are here and wondering how we're going to do this. So first of all, we start with a Havdalah service, a brief one that Sam will lead. And because we're going from Shabbos and Yontiv into Yontiv, we don't have besamim, which are spices, because we use spices because when we leave Shabbos and go into a regular week, our extra soul, our neshama yetera, is said to leave, and we feel a bit faint about the transition from holiness into a regular workday. So we need some spices to help give us, to refresh us, to do that. Because we're going from holiness into holiness, we don't do spices, so you won't see or hear or smell the spices during Havdalah. And then the Mariv service itself has some very special features which we've loved from over the years, and one of which Larry Kay will be singing the very special Kaddish that has all the different melodies from the course of the year. And this goes back to European Jewish history, especially German Jewish history. We'll hear more about that. So Larry will still be doing that tonight, which is just fantastic. And then we had, by the way, you should know, if you don't already know, that for traditional Jews, this is the only night of the year in which a Torah is taken out from the ark and read from. I know in many Reform synagogues, they do that regularly on Shabbat, on Friday nights. But in every synagogue on Simchat Torah, Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist, Orthodox, Renewal, everybody's reading from the Torah at night. Very, very unusual. Normally what we do is that we read, the traditional reading is at night we read the end of the book of Deuteronomy, and then in the morning service we read the end of the book of Deuteronomy and the beginning of Genesis. But at CBST, since we just observed tonight, we will read the end of the book of Deuteronomy and the beginning of Genesis, but more about that later. Many of you are wondering, what will we do to observe the Hakafot? What are the Hakafot after all? The Hakafot are the processionals. When we take out the Sifrei Torah from the Ark, we do 7 processionals for the 7 different aliyot, and we dance. And some of you might remember the days on the Upper West Side when all the different Upper West Side synagogues would come together and there would be dancing all night long, and they wouldn't get around to reading the portions of the Torah to be read until crack of dawn or very, very, very early in the morning. But because we can't be together right now and dance, we've tried to think of what we can do tonight that would really celebrate the Torah in a way that's authentic and honest and acknowledges we can't really dance. We could all stand up and dance, but the point is to dance with the Torah. It's not just dancing, although dancing is lovely. The point is to dance around and celebrate the Torah. So what we've done is we've invited a Soferet, a woman scribe, Rabbi Linda Motzkin, who came down to CBST when we did our Torah project in 2008 and did a whole workshop. So she, between the Mariv service and the reading of the Torah, Rabbi Linda Motzkin, who, by the way, is the mother of CBST, Cooperberg-Rittmaster, Rabbinical Intern, Ruchi, Sophia, Motzkin, Rubenstein. Ruchi has 2 rabbi parents, and Linda Motzkin is her mother rabbi parent. But Linda Motzkin will teach us. She's a Soferet. There are very few women scribes in the world. So she's going to join us via the miracle of Zoom from her studio in Saratoga Springs, New York, just north of Albany. And she's going to teach us about the art of writing a Torah. She's going to teach us, and then she'll take questions, and we'll really learn a lot about this great, it's a great art and great spiritual practice of writing a Sefer Torah. And then we will read the 7 different aliyot, 6 of them from the book of Deuteronomy, the end of the whole shebang, the end of the whole 5 books of Moses. And then we will begin immediately with the beginning of the book of Genesis. And I'm very, very, very proud that all of our readers are graduates or participants in our adult B'nai Mitzvah program or teachers in the program. And so we're really celebrating not only the text of the Sefer Torah and the ancient parchment and the ancient stories, but we're also really celebrating a community of very modern, very, very, very contemporary people wrestling with the Torah. So those who will be reading from it will also be celebrating a contemporary wrestling with the Torah. So more about all of these things as the night unfurls or unrolls. And I want to just acknowledge Michael Levine, who's really been such a foundation person at CBST for so much. And in this year, so many of his important roles have had to be elided or eclipsed or honestly eliminated. Michael's usually the one who helps to supervise our changing of the parochet and the mantles on the Torah at Slichot, and organizes the processionals at Kol Nidre, and is very key to all of our things that he hasn't been able to do in quite the same way. And so, Michael, we just want to acknowledge that there's loss in this for you this year, and it's loss for all of us to not see you doing those things. But we're so grateful for all that you do and bring to CBST. And tonight we're going to hear from so many different people for whom learning to read the Torah was not something they had as a child. Some of them did, but many of them came to it as an adult. So I say to all of you who are with us tonight, if you think you can't do this, yes, you can. And if you think you can't read Hebrew, if you think you can't read Hebrew well enough, if you think you can't sing, it doesn't matter. CBST will help you become one of these modern day wrestlers with the text itself. So I'm going to turn this over to Sam Rosen, our wonderful Cantorial intern. Sam will be leading tonight's service with our beloved Joyce Rosenzweig and our fabulous new rabbinical intern, Dave Yedid. The 3 of them will be leading our Mariv service, and then with some help from Larry at different points. and then we'll celebrate the Torah and then read the Torah. So welcome everybody. In the chat, if you have questions, please write things in the chat. If you want to wish each other good Yontiv, that would be appropriate, or Chag Sameach. Just let us, just communicate that if it doesn't violate your Yontiv observance. All right, Sam, lead us in Havdalah for ending. As I said last night, Shmini Atzeret is the 8th day of Sukkot, but it's its own holiday, and ending Shabbat. But it's Shmini Atzeret day 2 is actually Simchat Torah.
Yael la 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 Yael la 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 Yael la 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 ya la la ya la la Yael la 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 Yael la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen borei peri hagafen Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei meorei ha'esh borei meorei ha'esh Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam המבדיל בין קודש לחול, בין אור לחושך, בין ישראל לעמים, בין יום השביעי לששת ימי המעשה. בין קדושת שבת לקדושת יום טוב הבדלת, ואת יום השביעי מששת ימי המעשה קידשת. הבדלת וקידשת את עמך ישראל בקדושתך. ברוך אתה אדוני המבדיל בין קודש לקודש. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם שהחיינו וקיימנו והגיענו לזמן הזה.
Amen. Amen. May we move from holiness to holiness. Shavua Tov, Chag Sameach. We continue with the Mariv service, beginning our Simchat Torah together in prayer. We're in Sidur Bechol Levavcha, the CBST Sidur, which you'll find linked on our website under the Shabbat page, and many of you also own it at home. So we'll begin with the call to prayer, Baruch Hu, on page 78. Please rise if you are able in body or in spirit.
Baruchu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch Adonai Mevorach leolam va'ed.
Continue silently on page 80. You may be seated. The third line from the
מעביר יום ומביא לילה, ומבדיל בין יום ובין לילה, אדוני צבאות שמו. אל חי וקיים, תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני המריב ערבים. Amen.
We continue with our service by focusing on this divine embrace, Ahavat Olam, with an everlasting love, you have loved us, God. We turn together to page 86, and this blessing will lead us without break into the Shema.
ואהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים. ברוך אתה אדוני אוהב עמו ישראל. אמן. שמע ישראל אדוני אלוהינו אדוני אחד, ברוך שם כבוד מלכותו לעולם ועד. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם, בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך.
We continue davening the Kriyat Shema silently through page 94. I also want to mention we davened for rain this morning in the Geshem prayer. The second paragraph of the Shema has big themes of rain and yielding. We come together on page 94 in a moment.
Adonai Elohim emet.
We continue with Mi Chamocha, the fourth paragraph from the bottom on page 94.
מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נהדר בקודש, נורא תהילות אוסף אלה, נורא תהילות אוסף אלה, מלכותך ראו בניך, בוקי הים לפני משה ומרים, זה אלי אנו ויאמרו, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. ונאמר, כי פדה אדוני את יעקב, וגאלו מיד חזק ממנו. ברוך אתה אדוני, ברוך וברוך שמו, גאל ישראל.
As we exit the festival of Sukkot, we pray that God, ufos alenu sukat shlomecha, spread over us a canopy, a shelter of peace, which we need so much in our world. We continue together on page 98 with Let There Be Love and Hashkivenu.
Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu, Hashkivenu Leshalom. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter ושמור צאתנו בואנו לחיים ולשלום מעתה ועד עולם, ופרוס עלינו סוכת שלומך, ברוך אתה אדוני. הפורש סוכת שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועל כל העמים ועל ירושלים.
In place of the Shamru, which we normally sing on Shabbat, we turn to page 102 in the middle of the page for the line Vaydaber Moshe et Moadei Adonai vet Bnei Israel. Page 102.
וידבר משה את מועדי אדוני אל בני ישראל.
I'm pleased to introduce the brilliant Larry Kay, who will lead us in a very special Chatzi Kaddish on page 104. This is known as the Yaris Nusach, which, as Rabbi Kleinbaum mentioned at the beginning, really takes us on a journey through all of the Jewish festivals on our calendar year. So you're in for a treat on page 104. Please rise if you are able in body or in spirit.
Yitkadal v'yitkadash Shemei Rabbi V'alma divera b'chirutei V'yamlich malchutei V'chayechon u'vyomechon ובחיי לכל בית ישראל מגלה ובזמן קריב אמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך לעם ולעלמי עלמיה יתברך. יתברך וישתבח ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי לקודשו בריחו מכל ברכתה ושירתה תשבחתה ונחמתה דמירן ועלמה ואמרו אמן ואמרו אמן ואמרו אמן
Amen, amen, amen. We continue the next portion of our service with the Festival Amidah on page 266. There's no repetition. This is your private time with the divine God, the Holy One. You can rise as you are able in body or in spirit. We encourage you to use the words in the Siddur or the Siddur Shebalev, the words of your heart. We'll gather together in a few minutes on page 275. If you are still in the middle of your prayer, please continue as you need. We'll close our silent Amidah, our personal prayer, with the words, V'ha'er einenu. God, may you open our eyes and let us see the beauty of your Torah and your mitzvot, which we are celebrating and reading tonight, and Oseh Shalom, on page 274 at the bottom.
והאר עינינו בתורתך, ודבק ליבנו במצוותיך. והאר עינינו בתורתך, ודבק ליבנו במצוותיך. ויחל לבבינו לאהבה וליראה את שמך, ולא נבוש ולא ניכלם ולא ניכשל לעולם ועד. והאר עינינו בתורתך, ודבק ליבנו במצוותיך. והאר עינינו בתורתך, ודבק ליבנו במצוותיך. עושה שלום, שלום במרום יעשה שלום, עושה שלום, שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום, הוא יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל, לא עושה שלום, שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום, עושה שלום, שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום.
Amen. May we be blessed with infinite, bounding peace. Continue together with prayers of healing on page 130 in our Siddur. In a moment, I will pray and I'll pause. And during that pause, if you have names of people you'd like to add, I encourage you to write them in the chat or say them in your heart. מי שברך אמותינו שרה רבחה רחל ולאה, בלהה וזלפה, ואבותינו אברהם יצחק ויעקב, הוא יברך וירפא את החולים. All of those who've been mentioned in the chat. We send healing to Yaakov Lee, Ben Baruch, Moshe Berivka, Joseph Flores Ramirez, Patricia Martone, Peggy Miller, Barbara Moniz, Tal Ben Naomi, Ellie Perlman, Arnold Randall, Elisa Randall, Roseanne Randall, Leslie Rogowski, Sandy Wiener. We of course keep in our hearts and prayers all of those who are afflicted by COVID-19 in our community, city, and country. May they be blessed with a full and complete healing, a healing of spirit and a healing of body, together with all those who are ill among the Jewish people and all peoples of the world. May those who will not be healed on this earth be blessed with nights free from suffering and days filled with peace. May God grant strength and comfort to those who care for the sick. May God help us to find hope and courage as we face fear and loss. May all those who are ill be surrounded by the love of friends, loving companions, families, and community. And let us say, Amen.
Amen.
We continue with Kaddish Shalem on page 138.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, אמן.
Amen.
בעלמא דברך קירותי והמליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומייכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו,
Amen.
יהי שמי רבה מברך.
Ve'olam olal me'al maya yitbarach.
יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה. בריחו לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דמירן בעלמה ואמרו.
Amen.
אמן. תקבל צלותון ובאותון, דכל ישראל קודם אבוהון, דיבי שמיה ואמרו.
Amen.
אמן. יהי שלום רב מן שמיה, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו.
Amen.
אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום. עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל ואמרו אמן.
Amen. Yasher Koach, Sam and Joyce. We continue moving toward the Torah service. If you have a Siddur Lev Shalem, we briefly turn to page 402.
אתה הורית לדעת, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים, אין עוד מלבדו.
אתה הורית לדעת, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים, אין עוד מלבדו.
ועושה נפלאות גדולות לבדו, כי לעולם חסדו.
לעושה נפלאות גדולות לבדו, כי לעולם חסדו.
אין כמוך באלוהים אדוני, ואין כמעשיך.
אין כמוך באלוהים אדוני, ואין כמעשיך.
יהי כבוד אדוני לעולם, ישמח אדוני במעשיך.
יהי כבוד אדוני לעולם, ישמח אדוני במעשיו.
יהי שם אדוני מבורך, מעתה ועד עולם.
יהי שם אדוני מבורך מעתה ועד עולם.
Page 403. ויהי בנסוהרו, ויאמר משה, קומה אדוני, ויפוצו אויביך, וינוסו משנאיך מפניך. כי מציון תצא תורה, כי מציון תצא תורה, ודבר אדוני מירושלים. עבר רחמים היטיבה ברצונך את ציון. תבנה חומות ירושלים, תבנה חומות ירושלים. כי בך לבד בטחנו, מלך ירום ונישא, אדון עולמי.
Thank you so much to our service leaders tonight. And I'm welcoming everybody who's joining with us, whether you're here on Zoom or on Facebook. I know some of you are doing both at the same time. You just can't get enough of CBST's services in whichever platform. So I want to thank so much Dave Yedid, our Dave Yedid, our rabbinical intern. But you sing beautifully, Dave, by the way. You're a beautiful davener. And Sam Rosen, our Cantorial intern, who's a beautiful teacher of Torah and a davener. We don't believe in strict binaries here. And to Joyce Rosenzweig, our beautiful and beloved music director, and Larry Kay, our longtime CBST Chazan. Larry, is Rudy joining us tonight? No, Rudy is not joining us. Okay, Rudy's asleep. Okay. Well, anyway, so good yontiv to everyone. Good yontiv, whether you're here with us on Zoom or on Facebook or on both. Double dippers. So this is the part of the service where we would have opened the ark and taken out the Sifrei Torah and then done our 7 hakafot. And as I mentioned at the very beginning of the service, and I'll repeat now because I know many people have joined since then, we really wanted to come up with something that would replace the dancing with integrity, that we would celebrate and honor the Torah in a way that was meaningful without being able to dance. And we did consider a dance party. We did consider putting on, some Donna Summer and everybody dancing in their living rooms. But the point really is to dance with the Torahs. Just that is the point. So we decided we should do that some point. We think CBST should have a dance party. But that's not what we're going to do tonight, because Simchat Torah is about honoring this cycle of reading of the Torah. And as I said in my drash last night, Rosh Hashanah is about the renewal in some ways, the birth of the world, the rebirth of the world, the possibilities of renewal. Yom Kippur is about the renewal of our personal souls, our ability to have second chances and approach those things about ourselves we want to change and really have personal renewal. And Simchat Torah is about this renewal of the cycle of the Torah, of recognizing this profound reality that life itself is a cycle, and that but more like that DNA spiral, we cycle up and we come around to the reading of the Torah. And each time we come back to Bereshit, to Genesis, to the beginning, in the beginning of the year, we hear the same words, but we might be really different. We hear them differently when we're a 12-year-old or when we're a 52-year-old. We understand them differently when we're in a place of joy in our life or a place of sadness and grief. And every year we go through the listening and the reading of the Torah, it adds to a level of our understanding of it from our personal life, lived experience. And I have gone through this cycle with many of you. This is the 29th year of this cycle. And this celebration of Simchat Torah, where we celebrate the ending of the reading, the end of the book of Devarim. Tonight we read the last parsha, which is called V'zot HaBracha. This is the blessing. And then we'll begin immediately with the beginning of the book. And if you remember, the way we did it when we were in person is we literally rolled from one end to the other and could really feel the rolling of the scroll. And we would go through the scroll itself and appreciate the Sefer Torah's arc of the story and of the narrative. So because we can't do all of those things, it was Rabbi Rapport's brilliant idea that we invite a Soferet, Rabbi Linda Motzkin, to be with us tonight. Many of you met her when she came to do a program with us in 2008, when we were celebrating the completion of the writing of our Sefer Torah. And she didn't have to travel that far for tonight because she's in Saratoga Springs and is going to be joining us from her studio. Before she begins her teaching, and what she's going to do is teach to mirror the Hakafot in 7 different segments, to mirror the 7 different Hakafot. And then she's happy to take questions. So while she's speaking, if you have questions or comments, please put them either in the Facebook chat or in the Zoom chat, and we'll get to them after she does her presentation about any aspect of the writing of a Torah. And before I introduce her to all of you, we want to show you some photographs from when we finalized the last column of the Sefer Torah that we will read from tonight, by the way. The actual Torah that we'll read from tonight is the Torah that we commissioned in 2007. And from 2007 to 2008, the Torah was written. But as is traditionally done, the last column was left. And the sofer, the scribe, we had 2 scribes, helped people fill in the letters for the last column. And when we read from that column tonight, you will see that many of the letters do not look as perfect. Oh, look, there's my mother. There she's filling it in. There's Nancy Meyer. Oh, isn't that wonderful? So you'll see when we actually read that last column of the Sefer Torah tonight, that the people are filling in. It's not as perfect as when the scribe does it themselves. So it's really exciting. You can actually see in our Sefer Torah the evidence of folks filling in that final column. But bigger questions we're going to address now. How is a Sefer Torah written? What are the elements used to write a Sefer Torah? A deep question was asked today in our Limud program with our children, which is, can a robot write a Sefer Torah? Anyway, so I'm thrilled after we see these pictures to welcome Rabbi Linda Motskin. And I mentioned, Linda, earlier that you are the mother of the beloved and very missed Ruchi Sophia Motzkin Rubenstein, who's now in Eugene, Oregon. And we are now going to turn all of us over to you. And I'm thrilled that Rabbi Linda Motskin is with us tonight.
Rabbi Motskin, we need you to
Got it.
unmute
I
yourself.
got
There
it.
you go.
Got it.
Hi, great to see you.
Hi, Rabbi Kleinbaum. Or can I call you Sharon because we're mishpacha?
Can you believe this is what we have to do to see each other?
I know, it's ridiculous. But I got Johnny right here.
There's
Just off camera, but he can't resist popping in to say hello. It's so sweet to be back here with you. And it's so sweet to be back with CBST. You guys were among one of my very first gigs back in 2008 was when I came to CBST and shared with you. At that point, I was just at the very beginning of this writing of the Torah journey that I've been on since 2007. So we're dividing this up into 7 hakafot, and we'll get started. I will share my screen, and let's get started here. Actually, let me first put this into, hang on one second. I want to put my slideshow into slideshow mode, and then share that screen. Okay, here we go. So that's this. Okay. Just do a little fiddling while you're looking at that intro screen, which is just setting the tone here for, can all of you see the screen I've shared?
Yes.
Give me a thumbs up or something. Yeah, great, fabulous. Okay, so we set this up as 7 hakafot to correspond to these 7 series of dance scenes that we wish we all could be doing together. And each of these is a snippet. I'm going to try to take you very quickly through 7 different aspects of what it is to be writing a Sefer Torah as a woman right now in the 21st century. So we're going to begin with Hakafa 1. Sofrot, which is the idea of women even being able to do this work, is a 21st century chidush, a new thing. And so I thought it would be nice to kind of begin by thinking of this and for Simchat Torah in terms of the passage in Deuteronomy that we're going to be reading tonight, that Moses, Eved Hashem, died and Joshua was filled with the spirit of wisdom because Moshe had laid hands upon him, and this sort of transfer of the ability, the spirit of wisdom and the ability to do work that had been done by one person and now other people taking on is something that I was privileged to be part of. I was one of only 2 women privileged to learn from my teacher, Rabbi Dr. Eric Ray, who I like to acknowledge in any program that I do. Some of you may be familiar with the children's book, Soferet, the story of a Torah scroll. Eric Ray, the author, was my teacher, and I included a picture or 2 of me with him. I met him in 2003 and had the great good fortune of being able to learn from him until his death in 2005. In the picture you see here, he is looking at the first panel of the very first scribal book I wrote, which was a Megillat Esther that I wrote for my congregation and completed in 2007. But I was part of this first wave of women. 14 years ago, on April 3rd, 2006, we had what we jokingly called the first international gathering of Sofrot. At that time, only 14 years ago, there were only 6 women in the entire world who were engaged in this work of writing Sifrei Torah, and 4 of them were in my kitchen in Saratoga Springs. And I believe I saw in the pictures of the Siyum that you did at CBST, one of them was Jen Taylor Friedman.
Yes,
yes. Okay, so that Jen Taylor Friedman's the one in the white shirt with her back to you at my kitchen table.
Yes.
And at that time, in April 2006, there were only, in addition to the 4 women in my kitchen in Saratoga, there were also just 2 others in the whole world. Shoshana Guggenheim was in Israel at the time, and Rachel Reichard in Brazil. Jen Taylor Friedman became the first woman known to history to write a Sefer Torah. September 9th, 2007 is the picture that we have there of Jen writing the last few letters of the Torah that was commissioned by United Hebrew Congregation of St. Louis, Missouri. There's been a sea change in the last 14 years. Jen Taylor Friedman can be credited with raising up an entire next generation of female scribes. There now is a website, www.samscribes.com that features the work of women scribes around the world, many of whom were trained by Jen Taylor Friedman, and a few are now themselves training other women. We've since had a second and a third international gathering of Soferet, the second in Toronto in 2014 and the third in Woodstock. And you can see pictures of scribes, Soferet gathered together teaching. So that's my Hakafah number one. And now we're going to actually get into doing the work of making a Torah. Now, when I got started in this back in 2003 with my teacher, there were no women scribes yet. There were a few women learning, and there was really no way for a woman to get access to the materials that are used in making Sifrei Torah. How do you get kosher parchment? How do you get kosher ink? You can't walk into a scribal supply shop back in 2003 as a woman and say, I'm a Soferet, I need to buy my supplies. So I decided I was going to learn how to make all the supplies. And that's how the project that I was working on when I last presented at CBST in 2008, and I'm still working on now, 12 years later, 13 years since I began, is the Community Torah Project, this vision of making all of the materials to make a Sefer Torah. So we start with making parchment from deer skins, Hakafah 2. And by the way, each of the little art pieces that you see at the beginning of each Hakafah is an art piece that I've made out of scraps of deerskin parchment that turned out to be unsuitable for a Torah scroll. They are still wonderful materials for artwork. So here we go. I get deer skins from Adirondack hunters. Right now it's hunting season in the Adirondacks, October, November, December. That's the time of the year when I get all my deer skins. I have wonderful volunteers that join me in my backyard to first remove all the meat and blood from the inside of the hide, then soak the hide in a solution that will loosen the hair, and then dehair. Here's pictures of some people in my community, some of my students helping with this work. Then it gets attached to a hide stretching frame and stretched on the frame. This is work I love to do in programs where I travel to synagogues or college hillels, do this work as hands-on work with a group of students or seniors or kids. And everybody who's helped with the Community Torah Project has filled out a little slip of paper saying what they did. This is a sample from April of 2018 where Ariel Lynn Scrove wrote, "This was an amazing experience. I can't believe I took part in the making of a Torah," when she helped stretch and scrape a hide. Leanna Long, a religious school student who was in about 4th grade, wrote, she stretched and scraped. It was so much fun, and I like putting the clips on the parchment. You can't just walk into Target and buy a hide stretching frame. So even the building of the frame was a labor of love. It involved a lot of help from volunteers. In the big picture there, you see an engineer in my congregation and a colleague of his who helped design one of my frames. You also see me and my son and my husband constructing another one of the frames. Here's what it looks like when you have a group of people gathered around to scrape the frame the hide after it's been attached to a frame. And then comes drying on the frame and sanding. You can see in these pictures, there's 3 different sanders at work, a heavy grit belt sander to thin the hide, and then a medium grit sander, and then a fine finishing sander. So every hide goes through at least 3 stages of sanding. Avi Sklar, I loved him, wrote after helping me sand, "It was the most amazing experience of my life. The panels, once they are sanded down to be smooth and fine and no longer the thickness of leather, but now the thinness of parchment, they get cut out of the frame, they get measured into rectangles with lines scored on them. And that's kind of the big sweeping overview of making parchment. Now let's get into ink and quills. And I decided my art piece for the beginning of this Hakafah would be a rose, because the subject of ink and quills involves a lot of plant matter. So first of all, ink making. That is a chemist in my congregation who donated hours of time in his lab with various recipes in concocting ink. There's basically 4 ingredients in ink making. Afotsim, which are gallnuts that grow on oak trees and are a rich source of gallotanic acid, a key ingredient in the making of ink. They get boiled in mayim chayim, the second ingredient, which is living waters, water from a natural source, not from your pipe. And you can see in this picture, I gathered some snow freshly fallen to make the batch of ink that is reflected in this particular slide. Third ingredient is gum arabic, which grows on acacia trees, doesn't grow on acacia trees. It's the sap that gets drilled like you do for maple syrup, and the sap oozes out, you collect it. Gum arabic is a thickener. It's what makes ink viscous. Iron sulfate causes a chemical reaction with the gallotanic acid that turns what otherwise would be that brown colored water into black. And the right-hand corner, you can see the drops of iron sulfate being put into the ink right at the moment that those iron sulfate hits that brown water. There's an instant chemical reaction, and you can see that brown water turning black right as that picture was taken. Plants are also important with writing. In antiquity, scribes wrote with reeds. There are 3 reeds that are used by scribes to this day. The 2 that were used in antiquity, papyrus and bamboo. And scribes in North America also use a reed that grows all over the place here, which is Phragmites. You've seen this stuff growing. If you're anywhere near a river, it grows all over the place. It's actually an invasive that people struggle to figure out how to get it out of where it is. In that picture, you see one of my former bar mitzvah students, Ethan Tabachnik, with his mom, Roberta, bringing me a big strand of bamboo that had grown in her father's backyard in Long Island. Who knew? I thought you had to get bamboo from Florida or Israel, but apparently it even grows in Long Island. However, most scribes today do not write with reeds anymore because the New World brought us a much better product, and scribes do engage in chidushim, in renewing their practices. And while birds have been around for a long time, the shaft of the feathers of most birds are not good for scribal writing. They're either too bendy like ducks or too small like chickens. But a New World bird is the turkey, and turkey feathers are perfect for writing. They're great for cutting into quills. You have a picture here of me with an X-Acto knife cutting a turkey feather quill. And you also have pictures of 2 local farmers, John Vinzek and Eric Smasinow, who both have turkey harvests in November, the weekend before Thanksgiving every year. They grow organic, free-range turkeys that just a couple dozen each, that they have told me it is fine for me to come when they're having their harvest the weekend before Thanksgiving and get all the feathers I need. I also get feathers from local people, like here's a note that is gone into my contributors book. My contributors book, I've said everybody who contributes, I have a little note or something from them to track what each person who has contributed to the community Torah has done. So a member of my congregation, Dan Chernoff, wrote a small gift of a turkey tail. Hope you can use the quills for your scribal art. I don't have a picture of Dan with the turkey tail, but I do have right here on this slide a picture of Barbara Uliano, whose son-in-law hunted a wild turkey, shot a wild turkey, and she said to him, "You've got to save the feathers for the rabbi." And she came walking into my temple one day with that turkey tail. That's ink and quills. Let's move on. Hakafah 4. This is the theme of spiritual and physical preparation. And I want you to look very closely at the art pieces that I put up here, because these are all tiny little scraps. And if you look very closely, you can see that there is a crosshatch of black words of some sort that have been crossed out. That in the next slide, you'll see more clearly. One of the spiritual practices of scribes is every time you sit down to write, before you actually put your quill onto the document, the Torah or the Megillah or whatever, or the mezuzah or whatever it is you're writing, you first want to test the steadiness of your hand, the sharpness of your quill, the way the ink is flowing on the quill by writing something on a piece of parchment. And the scribal tradition is what you write is ayin mem lamed kuf, which happens to be 4 letters that contain within them pretty much all the different strokes that the scribe would need to make. But more importantly, they spell the name Amalek. Amalek represents humanly created evil in our tradition. Amalek was the one who attacked the Israelites right after they had escaped from slavery in Egypt, before they had even reached Mount Sinai, attacked from the rear, attacked the stragglers, the weak. Because of this act of attacking unprovoked those least able to defend themselves, Amalek comes to represent in our tradition the worst of humanly created evil. In the book of Deuteronomy, it says, blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. And this verse becomes what scribes actually do. It's not halacha, it's minchag, it's a custom, but it's a custom I and many scribes follow. You can see in this large picture on the upper left, I've just written out Amalek, and I have crossed it out while I say aloud, blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. So in the bottom right hand of this slide, you can see that I used to just have scraps of parchment that I would write one Amalek, and then the next day when I sat down to write, I'd write another Amalek, cross it out, the next day another one. But then I sort of got the idea, these might make some interesting art pieces. So here's an up-close detail from two of the art pieces from the previous slide, and you can see that those are made out of crossed out Amaleks. These are many, many days of writing. In addition to Amalek and preparing your hand for writing, there's also spiritual preparation that goes into writing. I follow, again, this is minhag, but it's a very strong scribal minhag of going to mikveh before writing any of the names of God. There are many different ways God is referred to in the Torah, but only a few that are sacred names that have such a degree of sanctification, like Yud-He Vav-He, like Adonai, like Elohim, like Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, that before a scribe writes those names, you want to be in a state of spiritual purity and physical purity, so you go to mikveh. Because I live in upstate New York in Saratoga Springs, where there isn't any indoor mikveh I can go to, my mikvehs are beautiful outdoor spots, like a friend's pond, or two of these pictures were taken at a private little nook I've discovered on the Hudson River. And I go and take a dunk and then write names. Luckily, Torah scrolls, unlike mezuzot, don't have to be written every word in order. A mezuzah does have to be written every word in order according to halacha. A Torah scroll does not. For a Torah scroll, you can start at the end if you want, and write backwards, or you can write a verse here and then 5 lines later another verse. For me, this is very helpful because I write year round, but I don't write names of gods. I have to leave blanks until summertime. What, honey? Thank you. My husband is saying, who's the photographer? I got to give him credit. My husband, Rabbi Jonathan Rubenstein, is my mikveh attendant, God bless him, who accompanies me and watches and makes sure I have a kosher dunk and everything gets fully immersed. And he's also the one who took these pictures for me. Thank you, Jonathan. God bless you. Then there's also spiritual practices of getting your...
We're very sensitive about photo credits.
Yes, we should be. We absolutely should be. And I can say with reasonable confidence that most of the photos taken in this slideshow were either taken by me or Jonathan. But not all. I'm sure there's a few others from others as well. So we're at my prayer to fill in yoga slide. There is, according to traditional Jewish law, an inseparable connection between writing Kitvei Kodesh, writing our sacred texts, and laying tefillin. In fact, the halacha that excludes women from being able to be sofrim, scribes, comes from a passage that I think most of you are very well familiar, very well acquainted with. The passage in the Torah in Deuteronomy that begins with Ve'ahavta and includes in it, Ukshartam le'ot al yadecha v'hayu letotafot beineinecha. You shall bind them as a sign upon your arm and let them be for reminders between your eyes. Uchtavtam, and write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. So halacha did not have to develop this way, but it did. It developed with the interpretation that the verb bind them is linked to the verb write them, which means those who bind are those who can write, and according to traditional Jewish law, men bind, men put on tefillin, women don't, therefore men can be scribes and women can't. Now, there's lots of different creative ways in our time in the 21st century that people are wrestling with that. And one of the ways is to say, all right, if you're going to be a scribe, develop a tefillin wearing practice, which is something I had developed when I was in rabbinical school and then laid by the wayside and then picked up again when I started getting into scribal arts, thinking I better, take this halacha seriously. My prayer practice, my morning prayer practice when I began included putting on tefillin and davening, but at a certain point in life, I started waking up in the morning being stiff and needing to do yoga. And so my morning prayer practice evolved into a yoga prayer practice. Actually, the pose that you can see me doing in that photo where my leg is in the air is my Ve'ahavta pose. I have taken my favorite yoga poses and overlaid them with yoga poses. So for example, for me, I think of tree pose as Shema, because that's what I do when I say Shema. And that leg lift is my Ve'ahavta pose. And so I lay tefillin separately now, and I do my davening with my yoga, but I do that every morning. The davening and the yoga I do every morning. The tefillin I do when I am going to be scribing, which I try to do every morning. It doesn't always happen. But it's become that prayer practice of getting my mind into the place where it needs to be to really focus for writing. Another key aspect of spiritual preparation are statements of sanctification that, according to halakha, must be made at certain steps in the process or the Torah is not kosher. The outset of processing parchment, that picture you see there of a big, ugly gray thing, is one of my hide soaking bins. And taped to the top of it is the statement of sanctification that, according to halakha, according to Jewish law, must be made when you put the hides into the bin to soak, to begin soaking, to remove the hair, to loosen the hair that you saw earlier in the fleshing slide. If you do not say that statement of sanctification when you put those hides into that solution, the parchment you make will not be kosher. You can still make very good parchment that will be fine to use for an art project, but you cannot use it for kitvei kodesh, for a sacred writings. It is not kosher parchment. So that statement of sanctification is the earliest one I make in the process. But you're also supposed to make a statement of sanctification before you begin to write a Sefer Torah, a statement of sanctification before you write each and every one of those names of God that I also go to mikveh before I write, a statement of sanctification before you sew Torah panels together. And I like statements of sanctification because they kind of help me get my head in the right place for doing sacred work. And because they're not brachot, they don't say Baruch Atah Hashem, there's no issue of a bracha levate lav, saying the name of God in vain. The statement of sanctification doesn't mention the name of God at all. In fact, it's a really Zen moment. The statement of sanctification mentions us and what we're doing. And the words are all some variation on, here I am, name the activity, sewing, or putting these hides into the line, or writing this sacred name for the sake of the holiness of a Sefer Torah. That's why I am doing this act. And for me, it seems really clear that the statement of sanctifications are all about making sure our consciousness is in the right place. So Rabbi Kleinbaum asked, can a robot write a Sefer Torah? Yes, and there has been a robot that's done it at the Jewish Museum in Berlin, but no, it's not kosher. Because in order for a Sefer Torah to be kosher, it has to be written with consciousness, and there has to be a human being with consciousness and the intention to create something holy that makes aloud a statement of sanctification at key points in the process, or else it is not kosher. And so that's a key piece. We're now on to Hakafa 5, writing, proofreading, and correcting mistakes. And the art piece that I put here, I love this art piece for the theme of correcting mistakes. The text of this particular art piece is that wonderful quote by Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav: if you believe that you can mess things up, then you've got to believe that you can repair, that you can fix. So that was the text that I was writing in the bottom half of this piece of parchment. And of all things, I made a mistake. For those of you who can read Hebrew, you can see that in the part of the bottom slide that I have already written, it says, Im ata ma'amim, with a final mem, instead of ma'amin, with a final nun. And then in the upper, more finished piece, you can see that im ata ma'amin, that final nun has now been corrected. So how do you correct mistakes? Let's go through Hakafah 5. First of all, here's some pictures of what it looks like to be writing. There's me in 2 different spaces writing, and there's also some pictures of different panels of the Torah, including I threw in, because it's Simchat Torah, the very beginning, the very few words I wrote, Bereshit bara, with the enlarged letter bet and the extra crowns on the letter bet. And here are different panels as I began different books of the Torah. I began writing the Torah in June of 2007. I reached the beginning of Exodus in March 2011, the beginning of Leviticus, March 2015, the beginning of Numbers in December 2017. I'm now approaching the end of Numbers. I'm in Parshat Pinchas on one panel I'm working on, and Matot in another panel I'm working on. I usually have 2 panels going at once, one at home, one at my synagogue. This is, by the way, if there was a Guinness Book of World Records for the slowest Torah ever written, it's this one. Most people, a professional scribe writes a Sefer Torah in 12 to 18 months, but a professional scribe is not making their own materials, and a professional scribe is doing this work full time. I am a congregational rabbi as my job, as my parnasa. I'm a part-time scribe. I'm lucky if I can write an hour a day, 5 days a week. And so rather than being on the 12 to 18 month plan, I'm on the 12 to 18 year plan. After I write a panel, it has to be checked, because a Torah scroll has to be perfect, and it has to be written by a human being, and there's an inherent contradiction there, because human beings aren't perfect. We make mistakes. No matter how deep our consciousness is and how intent we are, we make mistakes. When I travel and do community Torah project presentations, I like to bring Torah panels and set up a proofreading session. And that's where these pictures were taken. One's at a Jewish summer camp, a couple others are at synagogues or college hillels, where groups of people get a tutorial from me in how to proofread, and then they're expert proofreaders, and then they proofread. Each panel gets proofread gets proofread 3 times to make sure that all mistakes are caught, because proofreaders are human beings and they make mistakes too. And sometimes things get by the first or second proofreaders. Here's another one of those comment sheets. I love doing this. What an honor. Reba Parla proofread with Jean Aaron, column 70, lines 20 through 22. So everybody always asks what happens when a proofreader finds a mistake. What do you do? So I'm going to walk you through. Here is a sample. I hope you can see this well enough. If you look close, you can see that there is actually, if I put my cursor over here, now I guess can you see my moving cursor? You can? Excellent.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So right over here at the end, this top piece is a photocopy from the Tikkun L'Sofrim, the text that I used to copy to write from. And here's a line, and it's laying on top of my parchment where I wrote. And you can see I copied these words. I did a very nice job. All the letters are there until I get to the last 2 words, Lebeit Avotam, in the house of their fathers, to the house of their fathers. And I wrote, instead of Lebeit, late. I left out the second letter here, the letter bet. It's just late. And you'd think I would have realized that as I got to the end and saw I had too much room on this line. I had to stretch out that final mem because I was missing a letter, but I didn't know it until a proofreader caught that. So what happens? The first thing you do, one of the things that's nice about writing with ink on parchment rather than on paper, if you write on paper, it just soaks all the way through. You can't do too much about it. If you write on parchment, it dries on the surface of the parchment, which means if you make a mistake, you wait till the ink dries, and then very carefully, this is a special tool I have that has a glass, it's like a knife, but it has a glass blade at the top, very sharp glass, and you can see I am using it to scrape away. Basically, I have to scrape away from the letter that I missed through the end of the line because I don't have enough room to be able to squeeze in an extra letter without erasing all those extra letters that I wrote. So I start by scraping away the ink, and then I use some kosher sandpaper to sand away the smudges, and then I use a special electric eraser I have to erase the smudges the sandpaper made, and then this is what that line looked like, the same thing you see over here. But now I've erased everything from the Lamed on. And then this is what it looked like after I rewrote it. And now the final mem is not so stretched out. And now that letter bet is there and the whole thing reads Levet Avotam. That's how you correct mistakes. And I have had to do that more often than I would like because I'm a human being and I make mistakes. And God bless my proofreaders because they catch them. Hakafah 6, sewing and making Atzei Chaim. And this particular, Atzei Chaim are the Torah rollers. And this particular art piece, I had to throw in on the sewing slide, because the text here is Eitli Kroa Eitli Rapport. There's from Ecclesiastes to everything, there's a season and a time for tearing and a time for sewing. So let's get into what that looks like. First of all, this is the process. I did not make the Atzei Chaim, the Torah rollers, for the Community Torah Project Sefer Torah that I am writing. In the bottom lower corner there, you see a member of my congregation, Dan Chernoff, who is an anesthesiologist by profession, but a wonderful woodworker as a hobby. And I asked him if he would be willing to consider making the Atzei Chaim for this Torah. And not only did he throw himself into the project using locally sourced woods, but he also talked with me about the text that we should include and asked me for a sample of my calligraphy, which then got engraved by him into the tops of the rollers. So it was actually kind of thrilling for me. Accustomed to seeing
gorgeous, amazing.
I'm accustomed to seeing my calligraphy in ink on parchment, but I've never seen it in wood except for this. And the text, by the way, is in ein kamach, ein Torah. If there's no bread, there's no Torah at the top of one of the rollers. The in ein Torah, ein kamach, and if there's no Torah, there's no bread at the top of the other roller, which is a well-known passage that comes from the Mishnah, Pirkei Avot, and has given rise to my baker husband. Rabbi Jonathan Rubenstein's a baker, and I am the scribe, and we have a website, Bread and Torah, and together we do teaching programs on spiritual and physical sustenance. breadandtorah.org, my husband is shouting. If you're interested, that's our website, breadandtorah.org. So sewing panels together. The sewing is done using animal sinew. This is what animal sinew is, ligaments. This is what it looks like in its raw form, although sinew is kind of like string cheese. You can peel off these tiny little strands of it that you use as sewing the very first 2 panels of the Torah. I finally got 2 panels of the Torah fully proofread 3 times, 10 years after I'd started writing the Torah in March of 2017. At Skidmore College, Hillel, we had a group of
Motskin, all the way on the right is our Hebrew school song leader, Rachel Chang.
Rachel, you know Rachel. How fabulous. Yes, Rachel was a Skidmore student, and there she is. And she was one of the students that
Rachel, are you here? Is Rachel on tonight?
Yes, Rachel's here. That's how I knew that was her.
Oh, fabulous. Rachel, hello, Rachel. I can't see you, but it's so nice to know you're out there and that you and your friends at Skidmore are getting this shout out right now. So more panels have been sewn on since then. Most recently, I had the opportunity right before this shutdown of COVID to travel with Jonathan to do Bread and Torah programs in Cape Town, South Africa. And I brought 2 completed panels of the Torah with me there so that a piece of the Torah project could be done even on the African continent. And that's a picture of the group of people that helped with the sewing of these 2 panels together. And one of them wrote, I feel connected to generations of Jews spanning time and space. And another wrote, making a knot on the thread used to sew the 2 pieces of Torah parchment together. It has now traveled to the southernmost part of Africa as part of the project. And I really loved that. So Hakafah 7. Well, if you start with Devarim and the passing of the torch from Moshe to Yehoshua, then I've got to end Hakafah 7 with Bereshit, creation and recreation. So I couldn't resist pulling from the opening of Genesis. The earth was unformed and void with darkness, and then God said, let there be light. I sort of think that everything that we do as human beings that are creative is this kind of pulling a light somehow out of unformed chaos and void. And I think this whole Community Torah project sort of feels that way to me, as does all of the art pieces that I have done to utilize the scraps of bizarre, weird shaped skins that prove unsuitable for the Torah. So I wanted to just throw in a couple of, I've sprinkled the presentation throughout with some of those, but I also wanted to be a little more explicit and show you. How does that happen? Well, here is a hide on my hide stretching frame that was a perfectly beautiful, nice hide until it got stretched up on the frame, and there were a couple of very small holes that when they got stretched became enormous, and a couple of pinprick holes that when they got stretched became golf ball size. And you look at that and it's like, oh no, all this work has already gone into fleshing and soaking and dehairing and rinsing and putting up on the frame, and now I can't use this. But so at some point I realized, actually I can. I don't have to throw into the woods behind my house all the hides that I can't use for the Torah. I can actually do art pieces out of them. And this was one that I photographed what was on the frame, and then had a picture or two taken by my husband, photographer, Rabbi Jonathan Rubenstein, as I was working on it. And the finished piece uses the text from the morning liturgy, Shekacha lo ba'olamo, praising God who has such as this in your world. And I took that phrase, who has such as this in your world, and changed the pronouns. We have such as this in our world. You have such as this in your world. He has such as this in his world. She has such as this in her world. This is the way the world is, okay? It's full of imperfections and things don't turn out the way you want them, but you can still create and recreate and make something lovely and beautiful out of it. This is another sample. This is a donor recognition board that's hanging in the synagogue of my, hanging in the sanctuary of my synagogue. Pri Tzadik Eitz Chaim, the fruit of the righteous is a tree of life. And every one of those leaves has the name of a member of my community calligraphed on it who made a legacy donation to the congregation. Today, this is my last slide. To date, over 3,750 people have been listed as contributors to the Community Torah Project. Presentations on the making of a Torah like this one, except I gotta tell you, I've never done a 7 Hakafot one, so this is totally unique. The presentations on making Torah have occurred now in 14 states, plus Washington, D.C., the Virgin Islands, St. Thomas, as well as Jewish communities in South Africa, New Zealand, Argentina, Chile, Mexico, Hungary, and Poland. CBST, you folks were one of the oldest, because I did you in 2008. I was very new. And you're now the newest community to host a presentation like this. And so I wanted to end with a quote I love from Harav Avraham Yitzhak HaKohen Cook, Hayashar yitchadesh, hachadash yitkadesh. Let the old become new, let the new become holy. This is what we do every year as we cycle back around again to re-encountering Torah anew. So this ends my slideshow, and I thank you so much for inviting me to share this with you, and I welcome any comments, any questions you may have.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. Linda and Jonathan, so great to see you. First of all, wonderful to have both of you here. And we have tons of questions. That was a fantastic, exciting, deeply informative, and it achieved exactly what we wanted. We can't dance with the Torah, but this is a different way of dancing, of really honoring and loving and getting to know new things and deeper things. So Rabbi Rapport has been gathering all the questions that have come in. And so she's going to ask you the questions so you don't have to worry about looking at the chat. And so
eventually, Rabbi Motskin,
yeah.
I think that, once you catch your breath, you should definitely look at the chat, because it is so filled with love and appreciation and excitement.
Yael, can I ask you to copy the chat and email it to me?
Yes, we can do that.
Because I will be too distracted now to read it. And exactly. I really very much want to be able to read all of your comments. And I so appreciate everyone who made comments, even though I can't look at them. I can't look at them now, but I will look at them.
You have lots of Hasidim here because they have recognized you as the infamous Linda Motzkin, the author of Aleph Isn't Tough, which basically all of our Torah readers tonight learned how to read Hebrew and then read Torah for their adult B'nai Mitzvah from your Hebrew book series.
Kol hakavod lachem. I am so impressed by anybody who chooses as an adult to try to learn Hebrew. That's so wonderful that you've done that.
Linda, we had 90 students learning Hebrew this summer in an 8-week session over the summer. And people keep hawking me to start the session up again. And the next round is happening in the beginning of November.
Fabulous.
90 people. People are using this pandemic well. We've got some wonderful teachers. Many of them are here tonight. Ron Weiss is one of our Hebrew teachers. Jack Greenberg is our laning teacher.
With the idea of 7 hakafot for a presentation.
Yeah.
And here are many of our questions which follow your 7 hakafot structure, kind of topically, and then sort of a catch-all at the end.
Great.
So first, when you were speaking about being a Soferet rather than a Sofer and the legacy of this Chiddush, Jeremy wanted to know if you had heard of Soferets from Morocco earlier than the fairly modern date that you were talking about.
So I'm actually really glad that somebody brought that up. Jen Taylor Friedman is always very careful to say that she's not the first woman to write a Sefer Torah, that she is just the first woman known to history to write a Sefer Torah. But there are clear examples of women doing scribal work going way back. It's harder to know about women writing Sefer Torah, but there are absolute clear examples of women writing Ketubot, women writing Megillat Esther, and there's even a tantalizing hint if you go all the way back to the Torah of a reference of Tanakh, of a reference to HaSoferet. There is a single reference to HaSoferet. I can't remember now if it's in the book of Ezra or Nehemiah, because one says Soferet and one says HaSoferet, and Ibn Ezra's comment on it is this is not the name of a person, it's the name of a role. I do a presentation on the history of women scribes that sort of traces all of this. I had to really crunch. I could do an entire presentation on what was happening.
I think it's an important thing to emphasize that a scribe writes many different kinds of things, and the Sefer Torah is the most difficult, the longest, the most complex. But there are many other things that a scribe can write, as somebody who does this kind of Jewish calligraphy. That includes like the mezuzot that hang in our homes or the synagogue or wherever, or ketubot, as Linda said, or other documents. And many can write a smaller thing like the Megillah, as you said, the Megillat Esther is often kind of the first thing that's done. But a Sefer Torah itself is a different animal.
Speaking of animals, Rabbi Motzkin, we have so many questions about parchment for you. Do deer skins that you use for a Torah scroll have to be from deer that are slaughtered ritually or shechted? And can a Torah be made, or this parchment made from any other kosher animal besides a deer?
So kosher parchment can be made from the skin of any kosher animal and can't be made from the skin of a non-kosher animal. So you will never, ever, ever see a pigskin Torah. And in order for meat to be kosher for eating, it has to fulfill 2 criteria: come from a kosher animal and be shechted, that is killed with a kosher method of slaughter. In order for parchment to be kosher, it has to fulfill 2 criteria, but they aren't the same as for eating. It has to come from a kosher animal, and a statement of sanctification has to be made at the outset of processing, which I mentioned and showed up in. Halakha defines the outset of processing as not when you begin to flesh the hide, but when you stick it in the bin that's the dehairing solution that is loosening the hair, because that's the first transformative moment. Because of that, you can use roadkill. You can use animals that have been killed in any way, as long as it's a kosher animal, and as long as you make the statement of sanctification, you will make kosher parchment. So actually, none of the deer skins that I have processed have been killed by a kosher method of slaughter, but all of them are making kosher parchment, even though the meat from that deer would not be kosher. The skin of that deer is making kosher parchment because the deer is a kosher animal, and I make the statement of sanctification.
So
I
we
think
have-
one point should be made before you go on to the other ones that are related is that we sometimes don't even think of deer as kosher because you can rarely get deer that's kosher because it's very hard to catch a deer and have it killed by a shochet, by a butcher. So you don't usually go into a kosher butcher and find deer because it's not usually farmed in a way that like other animals. But I think one of the big questions that some of our folks have is, what about folks who are vegetarians who have issues about using animal skin? How do you respond to those issues around using an animal skin? Are there any ways to do this that don't? How do you feel about it personally too?
So I myself am a vegetarian. In fact, these days I am much closer to vegan than vegetarian, although I can't quite bring myself to completely give up ice cream. But I very much appreciate those questions, and I have been a vegetarian for over 3 decades, like going on 40 years, and I take that question really seriously. And my only answer at this point is that as the part of the first generation of female scribes, I felt like there were only so many things I could challenge at once. That is to say, halakha right now says certain things that we use in our ritual life as Jews have to be made from animals. And I think it reflects a different relationship to animals that existed between Jews and their animals in antiquity than the mass-produced, mass consumption, mass slaughter sourcing of animals that exists in our world today. But be that as it may, I didn't feel when I was beginning could be loosey and goosey with halakha. I felt like it was radical enough for me to be a woman saying I'm going to do work that halakha says women shouldn't do, for me to say, okay, I am going to do everything in accordance with every halachic stringency that I can, so that nobody will say of me, she's loosey-goosey with halakha. The worst they can say of me is she's a woman who shouldn't be doing man's work. I can't control my gender, but I can control every other aspect of what I choose to do in this process. And I am, on the one hand, a reform rabbi, and on the other hand, an ultra-froom scribe. You know, I really, I mean, not every scribe goes to mikveh before writing names of God. That's a stringency that I take upon myself that I know not every scribe does. As part of this, like, okay, I'm going to be froom as a scribe. I think that I have to leave it to other people to address the issue of where and how we can transform our ritual practices in a more vegetarian or vegan manner.
And
I
are you
have
aware
very
of-
few leather products. Most of the shoes I wear are not leather, but I have leather tefillin. It's the same issue. Tefillin are leather. You can't get non-leather tefillin. And the other thing I will say, though, about making parchment from deerskin that I get from local Adirondack hunters is that I feel good about this method of getting the skins, because these skins are not coming from some factory farm, mass-produced, disregard for the life of animal chain of supply. These hides are coming from local farmers that are going out to kill a deer that they are using to feed their family for the winter. And the fact that I am getting the skins at all is a tribute to the respect they have for the animals, because for the hunter, it would be much easier to just skin the deer and throw the hide in the garbage. You know, they can't eat the hide. And it is an extra level of work for them, instead of dumping the hide in the garbage, to get on the phone and call me and say, Rabbi Linda, I have a hide for you, and make arrangements to drive somewhere to meet me, to drop off the hide, so that no piece of this animal life that they've taken will be garbage or go to waste, even the pieces they can't use that they know I can use.
And
It's sourced really differently than most.
I wonder, how many hides does it take to make a Torah scroll? And somebody was wondering, what does a Torah scroll cost these days?
So how many hides? That's an excellent question. Most people have no idea how many different animals are in every single Torah scroll. every single Torah scroll has somewhere between 60, the skins of 60 and 80 different animals.
Wow.
I average about 4 columns per hide, and there's different Torah layouts. The Torah layout I'm doing is 245 columns long, which means, it's about 61. If every single panel was 4 columns, it would be 61 panels. Some of my panels are 3 columns, some are 4, some are 5. There was another half of your question besides how many.
How much does a Torah cost?
I am not in the market for buying a Torah, so I have no idea, but I can tell you the biggest cost in a Sefer Torah is not the cost of the parchment, even though you can see that parchment is expensive and parchment making is very time consuming and labor intensive. But the biggest cost of purchasing a Torah is the cost of the labor of a human being for 12 to 18 months of their life. So Torah scrolls, they can be $60, $80, $100,000 or more, depending upon the yichus of the scribe. I don't know. What did you guys pay for yours?
Well, I know that first of all, you can go and buy. I've bought several Sifrei Torah in my career. Once, when I was a student for the synagogue in Atlanta, I was a student rabbi, and we bought. There are many used you can get.
Yeah,
Obviously, they stay kosher, and they're very, and they can be fixed and repaired. And we paid about $15,000. That was in the 80s. I went to the Lower East Side, went through a lot of Sifrei Torah, brought one to a scribe to check to make sure it was kosher, took it with me on an airplane down to Atlanta, and it's now the Sefer Torah that the Atlanta said. So that was about $15,000 to commission a new Sefer Torah from a scribe who will do it, not over the many years that Rabbi Motzkin. Most scribes who do it professionally and actually make a living do it will complete it within a year. Probably 10 to 12 months, and you could pay between $20,000 and $80,000 for a Sefer Torah. And if the yichus is really something, you could go higher than that. I don't remember what we paid for ours, although we certainly have that document. I think it was around 30 or 40,000.
That's a bargain. I actually know a scribe here in the United States who says that his entire business is made up of doing Torah repair because he can't afford to write a Sefer Torah because, young scribes starting out in Israel can offer their services for $20,000, $30,000, and a scribe supporting a family here in America can't get paid $20,000 to $30,000 a year for their labor and can earn a lot more doing Torah repairs.
Yeah. But I don't remember exactly, but it was in that range, and that was in 2006 or 2007.
We have a question about sourcing this parchment from a member of the Stam Scribes Collective, who's also a member of our congregation, Shana Call. And Shane is asking, is there some question about the parchment that's sourced in Israel at the moment?
I'm not exactly sure what the question might be. I know that there are.
The cloth is questionable, is the phrasing of the question.
So there are folks here in the United States that are very interested now in ethically sourced parchment and endeavors to try to create a supply chain of ethically sourced parchment. So that may be where that question is coming from. Okay. Looking for a way to obtain parchment that does not come from a, kind of factory farm, mass produced, mass slaughtered, morally repugnant supply chain. And that is something that is a work in progress and not fully formed yet. At the moment, it is exceedingly difficult to be able to obtain enough parchment to make a Torah scroll from ethically sourced parchment, but not impossible. And Shoshana Guggenheim is the gal to contact about that because she's been working very hard at creating this supply chain for ethically sourced parchment.
I have just a couple more questions. So they're still mostly about parchment. Somebody wants to know, what is kosher sandpaper? And somebody else wants to know, are deer skins more likely to have those holes that you were describing that can show up than other kinds of leather?
I don't think deer skin are any more likely than any other animal, and the holes have more to do with the skill of the hunter in skinning the animal and whether the hunter was sloppy and made nicks with their hunting knife while they were skinning. It has more to do with that than to anything in the quality of the skin itself. The other part of that question was kosher sandpaper is just sandpaper that is all, that doesn't contain any animal products. It doesn't have like animal binders or glues that might have come from a non-kosher animal. So if you have all synthetic materials in your sandpaper, you're fine. But that's one of the things you have to check out, because some sandpapers do use animal products in the sandpaper, and then you don't know what kind of animal.
And this is our very last question. All of these questions were from our Zoom audience of over 100 people, but this one comes from Facebook. What is the oldest Torah scroll you've ever seen?
I'm not an expert in Torah scrolls, and I haven't seen, lots and lots and lots of different Torah scrolls. I know that one of my colleagues once, my teacher actually, Eric Ray, talked about working on a scroll that came from the 13th century. That was the oldest scroll he had ever encountered. I don't know, at my synagogue, we have a scroll that dates to the 1800s. And for all I know, that may be the oldest Torah scroll I personally encountered.
And do you date your Torah scrolls in any way?
Well, we just, the scrolls that we have two, and one of them actually has a plaque on it that says it was commissioned in 1914. And the other one we have is a Holocaust memorial scroll that came with its own little info about, the town it came from and where it was from. And we don't have the date of when it was created, but sometime in the late 1800s.
Well, Rabbi Motzkin, we really can't thank you enough. We're going to send you all the thank yous that people have poured into the chat. Just the excitement about the curtain that you've drawn back to bring us into this more intimate relationship with Torah, something that we know so well and yet have so much more to discover. Thank you so much for being our teacher.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I look forward to reading the comments that you sent.
Look forward to figuring out other ways for you to come back and teach now that everything's on Zoom. How easy is this, right?
Well, my favorite things to do are the stuff you can't do on Zoom. I'd love to come to CBST with my hide stretching frame.
Yeah.
And,
one day, we dream of that day.
Yeah, and bring Jonathan too.
Yes,
a bread and Torah gig.
Yes.
Jonathan does great bagel workshops and babka workshops, sweetbread. Bread and Torah is a great combination.
It is. It's great. Wonderful. I can attest to it. Jonathan makes great challahs, really great challah. And back to the Torah that we're going to now read from, we wanted to commission a Soferet, but at that time, Jen Taylor Friedman was the only Soferet who had even come close to writing a Torah, and she just wasn't available to do it. And then we had the very difficult task of finding a Sofer who would work with a gay synagogue. So we did not have many choices, and Yael Cohen, who was the rabbi in charge of the project, had to interview many, many different Sofrim who understood where the Sofer where the Sefer Torah was going to go, and who would be prepared to come and do the end column with congregants. That was a very important thing for us. And it was really Rabbi Cohen who worked very, very hard, and we could only find one Sofer who would work with us. So that was another level. Once we couldn't get a woman to do it, we had to really then find somebody who would work with CBST. And the guy who worked with us was really fantastic. And all of us who worked with him felt very, very, very close to him. And actually for many years, he did not grow up, he did not come from an Orthodox background. He was a Baal Tshuva, and then he really created this whole Sofer. He ended up having a whole Sofer. You'll see he's in some of those pictures that we just showed of helping people finish the project itself.
Of course, our beloved Hebrew school principal of our Limud B'Shabbat program, Julie Seltzer, is a woman queer identified Soferet. who was teaching our kids.
You just have to remember, when people say they're a Soferet, it doesn't mean they write a Sefer Torah. The whole Sefer Torah is on a, as you can see from Rabbi Motzkin, it's a completely different scale of a project than being a Soferet who does many of the other projects that we need a Soferet for. So it's really important to get what a major, huge project that is. And we've all learned so much. I feel like we've now done this very spiritual dancing with the Torah. Now we get to actually read from the Torah. And on the screen, as anybody who's come to any of our Shabbat morning services or Yontif morning services, we will have, because Harold Levine photographed every single column of our Sefer Torah. So Linda, you'll actually see the actual scribed Torah on the screen, and including the final column of V'zot HaBracha, where, as I said earlier, you can really see that the letters that are filled in are not quite as perfect as the earlier columns. But so now we are going to turn to the actual reading of the final parsha, the parsha of V'zot HaBracha. Most of this parsha is a poem, and you'll notice the way that it is inscribed looks very different. And I always point this out when we do the Torah travelogue, or whatever we call it. And it's really as Moses is coming to the end of his life and he's offering final blessings to those he's leaving behind. And then on the final, when we get to the final, the sixth reading of the 7 readings, which Jack Greenberg will be reading, which is the column in which you can see the letters, or look, we saw people writing in them, is really when Moses recognizes he's about to die, and in the end of that he dies, and the last and final word of the entire Sefer Torah, the last word of V'zot HaBracha, the last word of the 5 books of Moses, is the word Yisrael, all of us. And it's very profound. The Torah ends with Moses' death, but not to make him into a god. He's a leader whom we lost, and the Torah and our leadership passes from Moses to Joshua, but ultimately it's on all of us to carry this Torah into whatever our lives are, and to imbue our lives with it and it with our lives. And when we get there, at the very end, everybody will stand, if you're able. And will somebody lead the chazak or no? We'll have...
Yes, when Jack Greenberg lanes the final psukim, Ron Weiss, who is his kahal in the room, is going to sing chazak, chazak, v'nit.
And then we all do it with him. And it's traditional to actually chant along with the Baal Koreh, the last few psukim, with the cantillation, if you can. But everybody will stay muted, but we'll hear Ron with Jack, and we'll all do it. And then we'll move, as the cycle goes on, we go from Devarim, Deuteronomy, to the very beginning of the book of Genesis, of Bereshit. And when we get there, it's traditional that the Baal Koreh, who's Saul Zalkin, and Saul, you must, how many years have you been doing this? Forever.
Forever, I don't remember.
Forever, and then before forever. When we get to the end of each day, Saul will read the creation story of the 7 days, including Shabbat, of course. But when we get to the end of the paragraph describing the creation of each day, Saul will pause, and we will all, and maybe Jack or Ron will do the voice for this. So, but we will all say, Vayhi Erev, Vayhi Voker, Yom Echad, or Yom Rishon, or whatever, which day it is, and then we do each day, we recite it, and then Saul will repeat it. All right, are there any other instructions for the reading that our Balei Koreh want me to make sure I say? Did I get everything? Okay, so Jack, you're gonna be our Gabbai, correct?
I'm the Gabbai.
You're the Gabbai, okay. Rabbi Rapport is our Gabbai. Jack is a laner. All right.
So friends, this Torah reading is literally peppered with individuals at CBST who have committed to their Jewish learning at every level. who have become adult B'nai Mitzvah, or who have been teachers of our adult B'nai Mitzvah program, or who have continued their learning at CBST in all of these myriad ways to bring Torah into their lives. We will have Aliyah Blessings for each Aliyah, and it is customary that this Simchat Torah reading is for everybody. Literally everybody gets honored in the congregation when it comes to reading Torah at Simchat Torah. So the way we're going to do this is every Aliyah is in honor of 2 months of the year in which your birthday might fall. If your birthday falls within one of the months being honored, please respond to my blessing. This Aliyah will be you singing along with me. And then at the very end, just in case you missed the month that your birthday was in, the very last one will be Kol HaKahal. The entire Kahal of CBST is honored with our Bereshit Aliyah. I am going to share my screen so that everybody can see the words of Torah on it. And our very first Torah reader this evening is Sharon Bonder. So I want to make sure that Sharon is unmuted. Sharon, can you say Chag Sameach?
Chag Sameach.
Amazing. And so this Aliyah, the beginning of the Zot HaBracha, is in honor, it honors anybody born in the months of January and February. If that's you, please join along with me. Baruch hu et Adonai Hamvorach. Baruch Adonai Hamvorach leolam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher bachar banu im kol ha'amim. V'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha-Torah.
Amen. Bezot haberacha. Asher berach Moshe ish Elohim et bnei Yisrael lifnei moto vayomar Adonai misinai ba bezarach meseir lamo ofia mehar paran ve'ata merevivot kodesh mimino eshtat lamo av chovev amim kol kadoshav be'yadecha vehem tuku l'raglecha yisa midabrotecha Torah tziva lanu Moshe morasha kehilat Yaakov vayahi vishurun melech vehitasef Rashi am yachad shivtei Yisrael yechi Reuven ve'al yamot vihi metav mispar bezot lihuda vayomar Shema Adonai Kol Yehuda Elamo Tevienu Yadav Ravlo Ve'ezer Mitzarav Tiheyeh.
January and February birthdays, please sing with me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu Baruch atah Adonai noten ha-Torah.
Amen.
Thank you, Sharon, who became a bat mitzvah this past April. Our next reader is Ron Weiss, who will be reading this same chapter of Deuteronomy 33, verses 8 through 12. Ron is one of the beloved teachers of our Adult B'nai Mitzvah program and was the teacher of all of these students who are laning tonight. Ron will be chanting in High Holiday Trope for anybody who's got a good listening ear for Jewish music. And this Aliyah honors anybody born in the months of March and April. Sing along with me, and Ron will answer on behalf of the Kahal. Baruch et Adonai Hamvorach. Baruch Adonai Hamvorach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah asher bachar banu im kol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai notein haTorah.
Amen. Ulevi amar tumecha veurecha v'ish chasidecha asher nisito b'masa tirivehu al mei meriva haomer le'aviv ule'imo lo reitiv v'et echav lo hikir v'et banav lo yada ki shameru imratecha uberitecha yinsoru yodu mishpatecha li'Yakov v'tovatecha li'Yisrael yasimu ketorah dapecha v'chalil al mizbechecha barech Adonai chelo upoal yadav tirtzeh mechat modnaim tamav umisanav min yikumin Levinyamin amar Yedid Adonai Yishkon lavetach alav Tofef alav kol hayom Uvein ketefav shachein.
March and April birthdays will bless with me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai notein haTorah. Our third reader, beginning at verse 13 through 17, is Brian Zumhagen, who became bar mitzvah in April along with Sharon. So this is an aliyah for anybody born in May or June. You can sing along with me the blessing, and Brian will respond on behalf of the Kahal. Baruch hu et Adonai hamvorach.
Baruch Adonai hamvorach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai hamvorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu im kol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai notein haTorah.
Amen. Amen. Ule Yosef amar mevorechet Adonai artso mi meged shamayim mital umitehom rovetzet tachat umi meged tevuot shamesh umi meged geresh yerachim umerosh harere kedem umi meged givot olam umi meged eretz umeloah urtzon shochni seneh tavota lerosh Yosef ulkod nezir echav bechor shoro hadar lo vekarnei re'em karnav bahem amim yanagach yachdav afse aretz vehem riot Ephraim vehem alfei Menashe.
Let me go back. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai notein haTorah. Thank you, Brian. Our next reader is going to be Leslie Bernstein, who became bat mitzvah in 1997 with CBST. Leslie will be reading verses 18 through 21. And this Aliyah honors anybody born in the months of July and August. You can bless along with me, and Leslie will respond on behalf of our Kahal. Baruch hu et Adonai hamvorach.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai hamvorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu im kol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai notein haTorah.
Amen. Vili Zvulun Amar Simach Zvulun B'tzeitecha B'yisachar Be'ohalecha. Amen. Har Yifra'u Sham Yizbechu Zivchei Tzedek Ki Shefa Yamim Inaku Usfunei Tfunei Chol. Ulegad Amar Baruch Marchiv Gad Kilavi Shachen V'taraf Zroa Afkod Kod Vayareshit Lo Kisham Chelkat Mechokek Safun Vayete Rashi Am Tzidkat Adonai Asa Umishpatav Im Yisrael.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai notein haTorah.
Amen.
Thank you, Leslie. Our next reader is Judy Hollander. And Judy, do I have it right that you became bat mitzvah with CBST in 2005?
Correct, yes, the best class.
Not that there's any healthy competition.
No, and
our own Kohenet, Judy Hollander, will be reading verses 22 through 26. And this honors anybody who was born in the months of September and October. Baruch hu et Adonai hamvorach.
oh, Baruch Adonai havorach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai hamvorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu im kol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai notein haTorah.
Amen. Uledan Amar Dan Gur Aryeh Yezanek Min Habashan. Ulenaftali Amar Naftali Seva Ratzon Umale Birkat Adonai Yam V'Dachom Yerasha. Ula asher amar Baruch min banim asher yehi rutzui echav v'tovel b'shemen raglo. Barzel u'choshet min alecha, uchyamecha dov echa. Ein ka'el yeshubun, rokev shamayim be'ezrecha, uvaga avato sechakim.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torat emet, v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai, notein haTorah. Thank you, Judy. And now we reach our sixth Aliyah. This is called Khatan Torah. This is the Aliyah that will end our very last portion of the Torah, the Zot HaBracha. It is chanted by Jack Greenberg, who has been a true Khatan Torah, a teacher to so many at CBST. Jack will be chanting from chapter 33, verses 27 through chapter 34, verse 12, the last line of the Zot HaBracha. And as Rabbi Kleinbaum mentioned, you'll see the hand of the scribe change as so many of our hands were laid on top for this final sentence. So this Aliyah honors November and December birthdays who can chant along with me the blessing, and Jack will respond. Baruchu et Adonai Hamvorach.
Baruch Adonai Hamvorach leolam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamvorach leolam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu im kol ha'amin, v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai notein haTorah.
Amen. Me'ona Elohei kedem umitachat zeroot olam vayegaresh mipanecha oyev vayomer hashmed vayishkon Yisrael betach badad ein Yaakov el eretz dagan v'tirosh Akshamav Ya'arfutal, Ashrecha Yisrael, Michamocha, Amnosha Badonai, Magen Ezrecha, Va'asher Cherev Ga'avatecha, V'yikachashu Oyevecha Lach, Ve'ata Al Bamotemo Tidroch. Vaya'al Moshe me'avot Moab el har Nevo Rosh HaPisgah asher al penei Yerecho Vayar'ehu Adonai et kol ha'aretz et ha'gil'ad ad Dan ve'et kol Naphtali ve'et eretz Ephraim u'Mnashe ve'et kol eretz Yehuda ad hayam ha'acharon ve'et ha'negev ve'et ha'kikar bik'at Yerecho ir ha'tamarim ad Zoar vayomer Adonai elav Zot ha'aretz asher nishbati la'Abraham li'Yitzchak u'Yaakov lemor lizar'acha etenena heriticha ve'enecha v'shama lo ta'avor vayamot sham Moshe eved Adonai be'eretz Moab al pi Adonai Vayichbor oto v'gai be'eretz Moab mul beit Peor v'lo yada ish et kevurato ad hayom hazeh u'Moshe ben meya ve'esrim shana b'moto lo chahata eno v'lo nas lecho Vayivku v'nei Yisrael et Moshe Moab Shaloshim Yom Vayitamu Nimei v'chi Evel Moshe, Yehoshua ben Nun, Malei Ruach Chochma, Ki Samach Moshe et Yadav Alav, Vayishmeu Elav Bnei Yisrael, Vayasu, Asher Tziva Adonai et Moshe, V'lo kam navi od b'Yisrael k'Moshe, Asher yida'o Adonai panim el panim l'chol ha'otot v'hamofetim, Asher shalacho Adonai la'asot be'eretz Mitzrayim, l'faro u'chol avadav u'chol arto, U'chol hayad hachazaka, u'chol hamorah hagadol, asher asa Moshe le'enei kol Yisrael.
Kazach kazach v'nitkazeh.
Kazach kazach v'nitkazeh.
Yashikoach, beautiful.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torah emet, v'chayei olam natan b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai notein haTorah.
Amen.
Thank you, Jack, and thank you, Ron. This is the quickest rolling of a Torah scroll you have ever seen. And we return back to the beginning in Breshit. This will be an Aliyah for Kol HaKahal, just in case you missed the Aliyah in which your month fell, or it's an opportunity to take on another blessing. You can recite with me. Saul Zalkin will be our Khatan Breshit, chanting the very beginning of our Torah scroll, our very first words, our very first story. And this is so perfect because Saul is a part of a cohort at CBST who has taken on a new form of studying Torah for the past 6 months. A group of 90 strong on most mornings has been studying the book of Psalms with Rabbi Kleinbaum, psalm by psalm by psalm, in a moment when Torah of all kinds has never been more important to our community and to our entire world. So I invite everyone to chant this blessing along with me, and Saul will respond. Baruch hu et Adonai hamvorach.
Baruch Adonai Hamborach Leolam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai hamvorach leolam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu im kol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai notein haTorah.
Amen. Breshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz v'haaretz hayita tohu v'avohu v'choshech al pnei tehom v'ruach Elohim merachefet al pnei hamayim v'yomer Elohim yehi or v'yehi or Vayar Elohim et haor kitov, vayabdel Elohim bein haor ubein hachoshech, vayikra Elohim laor yom, v'lachoshech kara layla.
Vayi boker yom echad.
Vayi erev vayi boker Yom Echad, Vayomer Elohim Yehi Rakia B'toch Hamayim, V'hi Mavdil Ben Mayim Lamayim, Vayas Elohim Et Harakia, Vayabdel Ben Hamayim Asher Mitachat LaRakia, Uben Hamayim Asher Me'al Rakia, Vayikra Elohim larakia shamayim.
ויהי ערב ויהי בוקר יום שני.
ויהי ערב ויהי בוקר יום שני. ויאמר אלוהים יקבו המים מתחת השמיים אל מקום אחד, ותראה היבשה ויחן. ויקרא אלוהים ליבשה ארץ, ומקווה המים קרא ימים. וירא אלוהים כי טוב. ויאמר אלוהים תדשא הארץ דשא, עשב מזריע זרע, עץ פרי עושה פרי למינו, אשר זרעו בו על הארץ. ויקרן ותוצא הארץ דשא, עשב מזריע זרע למיניהו, ועץ עושה פרי אשר זרעו בו למיניהו. וירא אלוהים כי טוב.
ויהי ערב ויהי בוקר יום שלישי.
ויהי ערב ויהי בוקר יום שלישי. ויאמר אלוהים יהי מאורות ביקיע השמיים, להבדיל בין היום ובין הלילה, והיו לאותות ולמועדים ולימים ושנים, והיו למאורות ביקיע השמיים להאיר על הארץ. ויחן. ויעש אלוהים את שני המאורות הגדולים, את המאור הגדול לממשלת היום, ואת המאור הקטון לממשלת הלילה, ואת הכוכבים. וייתן אותם אלוהים ביקיע השמיים להאיר על הארץ, ולמשול ביום ובלילה, ולהבדיל בין האור ובין החושך. וירא אלוהים כי טוב.
ויהי ערב ויהי בוקר יום רביעי.
ויהי ערב ויהי בוקר יום רביעי. ויאמר אלוהים ישרצו המים שרץ נפש חיה, ועוף יעופף על הארץ על פני רקיע השמיים. ויברא אלוהים את התננים הגדולים, ואת כל נפש החיה הרומסת אשר שרצו המים למיניהם, ואת כל עוף כנף למיניהו. וירא אלוהים כי טוב. ויברך אותם אלוהים לאמור, פרו ורבו, ומילאו את המים בימים, והעוף יראה בארץ.
ויהי ערב ויהי בוקר יום חמישי.
ויהי ערב ויהי בוקר יום חמישי. ויאמר אלוהים תוצא הארץ נפש חיה למינה, בהמה ברמס, וחייתו ארץ למינה. ויחן. ויעש אלוהים את חיית הארץ למינה, ואת הבהמה למינה, ואת כל רמס האדמה למיניהו. וירא אלוהים כי טוב. ויאמר אלוהים נעשה אדם בצלמנו כדמותנו, וירדו בגד הים ובעוף השמיים ובבהמה ובכל הארץ ובכל הרמס הרומס על הארץ. ויברא אלוהים את האדם בצלמו, בצלם אלוהים ברא אותו, זכר ונקבה ברא אותם. ויברך אותם Elohim. Vayomer lahem Elohim. Peru orbu. Umilu et haaretz v'chivshua ordu. Bigad hayam uf hashamayim. B'chol chaya haromeset al haaretz. Vayomer Elohim. Hine natati lachem ekol esev zorei azera asher al pnei chol haaretz ve'kol ha'etz asher bo creates zorei azara lachem yeh lachla ulechol chayad haaretz ulechol of hashamayim ulechol romeis al haaretz asher bo nefesh chaya ekol yerek esef lachla vayichen vayar Elohim ekol asher asa v'hinei tov me'od
Vayer vayiboker Yom HaShishi.
Vayiher vayiboker Yom HaShishi. Vayichulu hashamayim v'haaretz v'chal tziba'am. Vayichal Elohim v'yom hashvi'i melachto asher asa. Vayishbot v'yom hashvi'i mikol melachto asher asa. Vayivarech Elohim et yom hashvi'i vayikadesh oto ki bo shavat mikol melachto asher bara Elohim la'asot.
Just beautiful.
Blessing.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
So beautiful, everybody, and the cycle continues. The cycle of our year, the cycle of the Torah, the cycle of our community. I feel so blessed to be here with all of you, and thank you to all the gorgeous laners, to everybody who has a birthday, Mazel Tov. For those of you who had an adult bar bat mitzvah, Mazel Tov, and how beautiful to have you now part of our laning community. So now we'll go back to returning the Torahs, as it were. Sam, are you here with us?
Yes, I'm here. Is Joyce with us? Can I see? Yes. All right. Very good. Sing with us, please. Al shlosha devarim, al shlosha devarim, al shlosha devarim, haolam omed. Al shlosha devarim, al shlosha devarim, al shlosha devarim, haolam omed. Al haTorah ve'al ha'avodah ve'al gemilut chasadim. Al haTorah ve'al ha'avodah ve'al gemilut chasadim. Al shlosha devarim, al shlosha devarim, al shlosha devarim, haolam omed. Al shlosha devarim, al shlosha devarim, al shlosha devarim, haolam omed.
We symbolically put back the Torahs with ki lekach tov and etz chaim hi. Torah is a tree of life for all who cling to it.
כי לקח טוב נתתי להם תורתי אל תעזוב. עץ חיים היא למחזיקים בה ותומכי המאושר דרכיה דרכי נועם וכל נתיבותיה שלום. השיבנו אדוני אליך ונשובה חדש ימינו כקדם.
Asher koach to all of our readers.
Oh, it's a tree of life to them who hold fast to it, and all of its supporters are happy. It's a tree of life to them who hold fast to it, and all of its supporters are Shalom, 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 Shalom. Okay, it's a little easier in person. Go ahead, Dave.
Shalom.
Shalom.
We conclude our service with Aleinu and Sidur B'chol Avcha on page 140, followed by the Mourner's Kaddish.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצא בראשית, שברא אותנו בצלמו, ונפח בנו את נשמת חיינו, שהעמיק אותנו בלימוד תורתו, וקידשנו במצוותיה, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא, שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסר ארץ, ומושבי קרוב בשמיים ממעל, ושכינתו זו בגובהי מרומים. הוא אלוהינו אין עוד, אמת מלכנו אפס הולדו, ככתוב בתורתו, וידעת היום והשבות אל לבבך, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים בשמיים ממעל, ועל הארץ מתחת אין עוד. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו
We take a moment to bring into our hearts, into this Zoom space, those we love and have lost. This week, the CBST community extends our condolences to mourners among us Bonnie Fox on the death of her mother, Ann Rothman Fox, who died on October 5th at age 97. Jeffrey Miller and board member Lori Magid on the death of Jeffrey's father, Charles Chuck Miller, who died on October 8th at age 90. We also mark the yard sites of the Shabbat of CBST members, Howard Bender, Schiffer Klein, David Davis, David Goldstein, Mitchell Kobrin, Wolfgang Marcus, and Chess Scheinborn. We also remember friends and family. You may write their names in the chat. Ralph Bernstein, Sarah Dressler, Cornelius Felt, Lester Friedman, Anna Friedman, Samuel Gold, Rivka Jessem, Harry Mandel, Harriet Odwack, Patricia Alice Pride, Manuel Rosenthal, Matthew Shepard, Max Silverman, Seymour Simmons, Bearda Solomon, Harold Sonberg, and Jerome Weining. We also offer condolences to the families, friends, and communities of all those who are dying each day from the COVID-19 pandemic. As of today, as of Shabbat, the total numbers of deaths are 23,874 in New York City, 33,369 in New York State, 218,125 across the United States, and 1,069,820 people, individual souls worldwide. We're comforted by the words of the Mourner's Kaddish on page 150. ויתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה.
אמן.
ועלמא דברה חיותי ואמליך מלכותי, בחייכון ובמכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב ועמו, אמן.
אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם ועלמי עלמיה יתברך.
יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתהלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה.
בריחו.
לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תוש בחתה ונחמתה, ואמירן בעלמה ועמו, אמן.
אמן.
יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיים, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו,
אמן.
עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו, על כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל, ואמרו, אמן. May their memories be for a blessing. In the Jewish calendar, we often have to move from sorrow to joy or joy to sorrow. And we'll do that now, holding these people in our heart and moving on to close our holiday service on page 194 with the words, V'samachta b'chagecha, rejoice and be gay on this festival. Chag Sameach.
ושמחת בחגיך והיית אך שמח, ושמחת בחגיך והיית אך שמח, ושמחת בחגיך והיית אך שמח, ושמחת בחגיך והיית אך שמח. יא לה 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la 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 ושמחת בחגיך והיית אך שמח, ושמחת בחגיך והיית אך שמח.
Blessings to everyone for a year full of strength, patience, humor, community, the presence of holiness in all of our lives. And let's all stay together. We're in this together, and we're take our Sefer Torah and the words of the Torah with us through this year which comes. I know I feel so deeply strengthened by these festival holidays, by these festival services, by Shabbos services, by studying together, by being together. So please, I pray for each of us to have a year full of blessings from places known and places unknown. Thanks everybody for joining us tonight. My love to everybody. Good Yantiv, good Yantiv, good Yor, good Yantiv.
Bill Rosenblum is holding up his Trans Pride Kiddush cup. Perhaps he would like to lead us in a bracha? No, he's just showing it off.
No,
Yeah.
he's saying it's Kiddush. He wants to make Kiddush.
Yeah.
Sam does Kiddush. Sam does Kiddush. I want to hear Sam do Kiddush.
Sam's getting the Kiddush.
Okay.
Are we doing a Kiddush?
Yeah, let's do Kiddush. Do you have a Kiddush in front of
Yes. Yes. Yes.
But Bill will hold up the Kiddush cup. He's got the Kiddush cup with the wine. You sing the Kiddush.
Okay, very good. Very good. Let me just get my...
The weirdest thing, it's still technically Shmini Atzeret, even though it's Simchat Torah. That's
right.
As I said last night, this is the strangest holiday system we have. After this, it gets a lot easier. Shmini Atzeret is technically 2 days, and the second day of Shmini Atzeret is Simchat Torah. But the Shmini Atzeret, for us as diaspora Jews, is also the 8th day of Sukkot. It's too weird. It's just too weird altogether. Anyway, so, right, Bill, it's complicated. This is very complicated, but that's why we say what we say for Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah is the same thing in the Amida and for the Kiddush. Okay, Sam, lead us, and Bill, you hold up the Kiddush cup.
Savri chavarai v'chavarotai.
Chaim.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen.
Amen.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu im kol am ורוממנו עם כל לשון וקידשנו במצוותיו ותיתן לנו אדוני אלוהינו באהבה מועדים לשמחה, חגים וזמנים לששון. את יום השמיני חג העצרת הזה, זמן שמחתנו, מקרא קודש זכר ליציאת מצרים. כי בנו בחרת ואותנו קידשת עם כל העמים. ומועדי קודשך בשמחה ובששון הנחלתנו, ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש ישראל והזמנים. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם שהחיינו וקיימנו והגיענו לזמן הזה.
Amen. L'chaim.
L'chaim, l'chaim. Good Yontiv, everybody. Good Yontiv. Thank you all for all of your laning in your heart and your soul. Blessings to everybody.